How can the Formula One sprint race be improved? With the first sprint race from the 2022 season at Imola, we saw some slight changes from last year, but I still feel like the sprint race format has room for improvement. Watch to the end of the video to see what changes I would make to make sprint qualifying just as good as the Grand Prix, and what teams could be offered as a reward for finishing high up in the race instead of points. I do like the changes that were made this year, such as pole position staying for the fastest qualifier and more points in the sprint. But I don't feel like this is enough to make sprint as good as qualifying or the Grand Prix. It's like making something that's fundamentally flawed slightly better. It's okay, but I think sprint as a whole needs a rethink. My main problem with the sprint race is that it is too similar to the Grand Prix. It allows for the qualifying order to typically reset to a more standard order based on car performance. This leads to less overtakes in the actual race as the slower cars end up behind the faster cars. I feel like it's not different enough to offer something interesting. It feels like a segment of the Sunday's race has been taken out and put on a Saturday. In this video, I'll be going through my opinions on what I would do to make sprint quali much more interesting and worth drivers pushing the limits. First things first, I think the qualifying race format works perfectly. Drivers have a chance to qualify in the best position for Sunday's race and then in the Grand Prix to gain as many points as possible. So with a tried and tested format working so well, but sprint quali looking like it's here to stay due to the increased money it brings to F1, how can sprint qualifying be improved? My main issue with sprint qualifying is it feels like it's just being tagged on or pushed into the format of the weekend that works perfectly. I think sprint quali needs to be separated from the Grand Prix weekend, but how can you separate a race that directly affects the order of the starting grid on Sunday? Okay, let's get into things. Let's keep the Friday qualifying, Saturday sprint and Sunday race as it is. I think it'd be strange to have the sprint on a Friday or qualifying on a Saturday, and you need to keep one race for each day as this is the main selling point for F1. Friday quali will set the grid for Sunday's Grand Prix, which leaves Saturday just for the sprint. Let's scrap the points as well. With a 6 times increase on this year's points, I feel like these points are still pretty pointless as they're only going to be for the top 3 teams. Let's say a driver from the bottom team puts in an amazing qualifying lap and puts it on pole. Will they keep Verstappen or Leclerc behind for 1/3 of a Grand Prix race distance? No, probably not. So you may be thinking, with no points up for grabs, what do teams have to fight for? Something that is a lot more limited in this 2022 season with the cost cap in place. Can you guess? Car development. One of the purposes of the cost cap is to provide a more level and competitive field, which I think everyone would like to see. With the top teams not being able to spend 3 to 4 times on a car's development than the lower teams, this will naturally close the field. So what are F1 already doing? You may have heard that the development of these 2022 cars, aerodynamics is the most important factor that the teams are trying to understand. To try even the playing field, the FIA have decided to give teams with the lowest in the constructors the most time in the wind tunnel and the highest finishers in the constructors the least time. Let's expand on this. We now get into the main bulk of what I'm suggesting. For the 3 sprint races of the year, let's keep them completely separate from the rest of the weekend, but with development up for offer. The sprint race grid would be based on the reverse grid of the current Drivers' Championship at the time of the race. Still lasting for 1/3 of the Grand Prix length, as I think this works well, and any less would be too short and any more would be too similar to the Grand Prix. The finishing positions of the sprint race would be rewarded teams with the most development for finishing the highest. For example, if Williams were P15 and P20 in the constructors, they would start the sprint race in P1 and P5 due to the reverse grid. Let's say as they're the weakest car, they drop down to P3 and P7 during the race. So P3 would earn Williams 18% and P7 would earn Williams 14% above the baseline on car development. This would be summed to give a 32% increase in car development on the following season above what the baseline would be. Obviously all teams would get a base amount of development to improve their cars, but this small addition would give teams an incentive to fight for something that is not points. As I don't think the sprint race really works with the limited amount of points that are available for teams. This would give all teams on the grid something to fight for. You'd see battles between P19 and P20 to see whether they get an additional point, and the reverse grid would mean that the slower cars would be able to try hold off the faster cars, and this could be picked for tracks that are harder to overtake. I think this format offers something that's completely different, yet still fair and would be really interesting to watch. Now comes the question of how many sprint races do you have a season if we're involving car development. One race puts too much on the line, but every weekend would make the percentages so insignificant it would be the same as the constructors. Taking the 3 sprint races in the 2022 season in Imola, Austria and Brazil, I think 3 for now is suitable, but if more sprint races were added in the future, which has been hinted, the percentage of development for each race can be reduced, with the overall development still the same. One option would be to keep the race development points separate from the different races, and results in sprint races to be focused on different areas of the car. An example of this, Imola. You could be fighting for the aero development. Silverstone is an engine development race and Brazil is a chassis development race. The percentages are kept separate and this is split up for the different areas of the car. Another option would be to average the car development points across the season, take an average at the end of the following season and hand this to the teams. There is one issue with all of this, and that is that teams need to make a unanimous decision to allow any changes to be made. I can't see the better teams wanting this as they would have an advantage already, but also I couldn't see teams in the bottom half of the table agreeing to sprint quali before when it was added last season, where only the top 3 drivers got points, so I think this could be approved. What do you think of this format? I think this leads to the qualifying and Sunday race to be kept separate, and this standalone event where cars can fight for development points 3 times a year to be quite an interesting spectacle. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you could subscribe and like the video, that would help the channel to grow massively. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys soon.